interesting questions. I'm wondering whether we can start having a look at those. Also, can I just encourage everybody, if you have any questions, please do put them into the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll hopefully be able to get through most of them during the time we have left with us. Okay, colleagues, we've seen the questions coming through. I'm wondering whether we might want to pick up on some of them. Dagmar, I think you partly addressed one of the questions about does Northern Ireland stay in the single market. I wonder if you could just sort of expand a little bit on that question, the extent to which it does or it does not.
Okay, I'll try my video, because if I have the video on, everything somebody says comes on blurred here. That's why I'm switching it off in between. So Northern Ireland only stays into the single market so far to the extent that the free movement of goods, including the customs union, is covered. And that means it's excluded from free movement of workers, free movement of services, and freedom of establishment. And it also, of course, stays out of the not only economic and monetary union, but also free movement of capital. So that's the answer. And I said, well, there is dynamic with applying Article 12 of this protocol, where the specialized committee, as a subcommittee of a joint committee, has to consider what should happen in the future. But and there can be alignment. So I think Viviane is going to say, but the agricultural market, yes, of course, you're right there. There's also a question on the single electricity market. The good news are that the single electricity market is part of the dynamic alignment. The single gas market is not. That's, of course, a problem there. So if the regulations on the single electricity market are changed, that's part of the dynamic alignment under Articles 5 to 10. So we are in. I might be proven wrong, but I think that both parties are interested that the lights not going out in Northern Ireland. And so that's why I would suspect that agreement of keeping Northern Ireland not only in the single electricity market, but extending that to the single gas market may be easier achieved than some other things. But well, maybe I shouldn't predict, because that's not my my policy area. Yeah, if anyone wanted to get in somewhere, I stopped my video out.
Okay, thanks very much. Clearly a lot depends on the UK maintaining regulatory alignment for Northern Ireland with the EU to ensure that Northern Ireland retains the position it's been given in terms of access to the single market and the customs union. There was an interesting couple of questions in there about what happens if the UK doesn't meet its obligations. And I think there's a question in there about, okay, if the UK does not fulfil the obligations, it's not seen to be implementing its obligation effectively, would there need to be an EU presence at the Irish border? I don't know whether Viviane or Katy want to come in on that question.
And the thing I would say is that the EU, so first and foremost, the UK government has repeatedly said it will implement the protocol, and the command paper of the 20th of May was very welcome in that regard, in that it was confirming that it fully intends to implement the protocol. And certainly we do see movement now from the UK government to that end, although, as has already been highlighted, there's a long way to go, not least in terms of detail. So the intention is there. There is always the risk of a sort of a breakdown in relations, and in which case I think we need to bear in mind that, yes, there will be pressure on and focus on what happens in Northern Ireland, but there are many other entry and exit points between the UK and the EU, and we shouldn't assume that that everything will come down to the Irish border. I don't think. I think if there are difficulties and and risks vis-a-vis the UK and the EU that they'll be felt most directly and immediately in other entry points to the EU, which will possibly then shift dynamics to get the UK back to the table and get those negotiations back up and running again. So I wouldn't anticipate any sense of the EU being back at the Irish, or coming to the Irish border, even in that scenario.
Thanks.
I can just jump in terms of what Katy and Dagmar were saying. I think it's what matters, I guess, is realizing how patchy the protocol is compared to the situation today. There is actually very few, I mean, of course, the customs, like the Union Customs Code is a gigantic piece of legislation, but there's actually most of the, like the acquis, that, like the EU rules that apply currently to Northern Ireland, a lot of them will not have to apply after Brexit. And in many ways, we're going to have sometimes, policies that are kind of implemented together. Part of them will have to still continue to be complied with, and others not. So, and this is definitely, so on the environmental side, that's definitely something you're seeing, where some key pieces of environmental legislation that are currently jointly complied with, for example, the Water Framework Directive, where you've got, of course, transnational river basins, and so you've got both North and South working together on this. Northern Ireland doesn't have to doesn't have to comply with the Water Framework Directive after after Brexit and after the end of the transition period. Birds and Habitats Directive, which underpin nature protection on the island of Ireland, same. Nitrates Directive, which has, which doesn't have many fans among farmers, same. So you're going to have a lot of tension points there, because that's going to create opportunities potentially to get, for smuggling of slurry, for example, that you haven't seen before. So I think, it's really important to think that when we're talking about Northern Ireland is not going to be in the single market, it's actually going to be perhaps in the single market for goods. Most of EU environmental policy was developed on, to foster that single market for goods, to prevent, create this level playing field. And what you're getting is, in many ways, that single market for goods without the level playing field in terms of protection for workers and in terms of protection for the environment. And that creates a very interesting and unique environment, which lots of uncertainties.
While you're on, Viviane, there's a question that came in towards the end there, I think from Brian Scott, about some NI organic producers currently depend on GB-oriented certified inputs. Will this certification continue after the 1st of January?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay. And there was another environmental question about any updates on climate change in terms of the UK-EU relationship.
No, so there's very little actually on climate change in documents we've seen for now. A lot of it, and that is that's very surprising to me in many ways, because the UK has been one of the EU leader on climate change. And the new commission is, with the Green Deal, is really pushing for climate ambition. So it would have been a very easy kind of positive news story to show the UK and EU working together strongly. I think because we've had a delay in the UNFCCC climate negotiations that were supposed to be held in Glasgow this November, and now it's been pushed back a year. Of course, if we still had that climate negotiation, I think then we would have seen rapid movement so that the UK and EU could present a united front in Glasgow. But now, because that's been pushed back, I think everything's been pushed back right now. So we're seeing a lot of interesting discussion in the EU side on how post-COVID recovery has to be linked with net zero. We're seeing that this is what the UK Climate Citizens Assembly is calling for as well. So for now, it looks like it's kind of too domestic process on potentially linking COVID and climate recovery, but not so much linking to the Brexit negotiation, but this should be.
Okay. A few other questions in there. Dagmar, I wonder if you want to take this one. Germany assumes the EU presidency next month. What do you think the impact of Germany assuming that presidency will be on the negotiations?
Well, that's difficult to assess, but at least the Chancellor has already expressed that starting that negotiation will be not a priority. The priority will take the EU out of the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19. That will be the priority of the German presidency, but they do have the getting the negotiation for the future relationship to a good start and having a basic agreement agreed by October, as you said, David, because after that you just won't get it through the line, and all the national parliaments is one of the other aims they want to conclude. So I think that perhaps, I think that there is when you look what happens in the German political style landscape, so the political organizations which are attached to the political parties, like the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, to the Social Democratic Party, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, they now start seminars on how the NI protocol should be implemented, and also how the future trade relationship should work. And that's an indication that the parties gear up to get involved. So I think it will be it will be a presidency which doesn't forget about this future relationship. And they want to have a deal, which will probably be a very fragmentary deal. So I think overall will be positive. The Germans are also very keen on stressing that they want to defend the EU internal market in this. They see the danger, which I've highlighted. I didn't make this up, yes. that Article 16 of the protocol isn't a very sharp sword, and they will try to insist on what little leverage they have to ensure that the UK does comply with its obligations. If that makes any sense.
It definitely does. I think just one thing I'd like to add on that. I mentioned in my presentation that we've had the specialised committee meeting, we've had the joint committee meeting. One of the interesting things about the specialised committee when it met was that what was expected was that the EU would turn up represented by the Commission, probably with the Irish in attendance. But ultimately what happened at the meeting was I think 6 or 7 other member states came to the meeting as well, including France, including Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, basically because of their concerns about the extent to which the UK was going to meet its obligations under the protocol. For them, they are looking for a very, very fulsome implementation of the protocol, because they do see the Northern Ireland GB border as being a soft border at the moment, and one which could be exploited and therefore poses a threat to the single market and the customs union. So they're really keeping their eye on the extent to which the UK is meeting its obligations. And I think we can probably expect that to continue for some time until there is that certainty that the UK is going to meet its obligations. Okay. A couple of other questions in there. I know, Katy, you presented on the opinion, the findings of the NILT survey, but there is a question in there about transit of goods coming from the rest of the EU cross GB into Northern Ireland. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you see that working, some of the challenges there. Also mindful of the fact that a lot of the goods that come from GB to NI actually come via Holyhead, Dublin.
Yes. So that one hasn't been dealt with yet. I mean, essentially, you're absolutely right. So we tend to think about movement between GB and NI. All the focus has been on direct movement, say, into Liverpool or Kenryan and vice versa back here. But so many goods, of course, travel down through the rest of Ireland. And so we can presume that there will be transit arrangements applying there. Transit procedures will apply for those goods going from Northern Ireland into GB across Ireland through Dublin, basically. And the same would be the case if they went through Ireland to get into the EU, elsewhere in the EU. So it would be the case for goods going from the Republic of Ireland into the EU across the land bridge, so to speak. This is why this issue of having no paperwork on goods moving from NI into GB is such a curious one, because of course there would be an incentive of a type for goods to move from the Republic of Ireland up through NI into GB if it was worthwhile, and that depends on all sorts of conditions, of course. And I'm not sure if so, and in terms of, but we haven't got any detail yet on how it will look for goods coming from the rest of the EU into NI. It just depends where they're coming from. But we can presume if they're coming from GB into Dublin, up into NI, then transit will apply. Can I answer the question on the presence of the EU, or did you want to take that, David?
No, you're happy for you to take that.
So just this question of the EU technical presence. So the question there is about rejecting the EU's request for permanent monitoring presence. And we've seen that in the UK command paper, the UK did acknowledge that the EU has the right to be present. Whether this be permanent or not is, as the questioner notes, a sort of a matter of dispute. I mean, the EU has a right to be present during any of these activities, according to the protocol. And then we have this question of what that actually looks like. We've seen, I think, the latest thing from Penny Mordaunt, following up to Michael Gove's response on this, sort of implies that there could be, well, obviously, this is a matter to be decided by the Joint Committee. So it's with what that actually looks like. So although the UK has been quite, forthright in rejecting any sense of an EU office, if you like, there is still the scope for having some kind of compromise, not least because the UK has acknowledged the EU does have that right to be present. But what that looks like, we can assume the EU will be quite careful on that. But on the other hand, it wants to be really sure that the UK is properly implementing the protocol across customs, VAT, and all the others.
Okay, thanks. I'm tempted to say a Brexit discussion these days wouldn't be complete without a question about fish, and I see we've actually got one in there, although we've not touched on fish much. Viviane, any comments on the fish question?
Well, I think you're the fish expert among us, David. So I will send it back to you, actually.
Okay. I wouldn't claim any expertise on fish here, except for I've always noticed there's a provision within the protocol which requires a decision to be taken this year on tariff exemptions for fish entering Northern Ireland, caught by vessels registered in Northern Ireland. As you probably or may not know, fish is not covered by the provisions of the protocol in terms of free movement, and the provisions of the protocol essentially treat fish as imports into Northern Ireland, and that includes those which are caught by vessels operating out of ports in Northern Ireland. And the whole idea, one of the key questions to address in the course of the transition period is what sort of tariff exemptions can there be on those fish. Now, the expectation is this will be addressed in the wider UK-EU relationship, but the understanding from a technical paper which was issued by the Commission earlier this year is that they are going to be treated as third country imports, and therefore any regulatory requirements will be applied to them. But we've not seen much detail on this at all. So I think the question was asking about complex processes through which producers in Northern Ireland will have to go. I think that seems to be where we are heading. But in the absence of any further detail, particularly from the UK side, it's difficult to provide a definitive answer there. But I think we should expect change to be afoot in terms of arrangements for fish regarding the catches by fleets in Northern Ireland. Does not receive much attention.
So if I can just jump on that by comparing the fish to the kind of agri side of the discussion, we've been seeing already, I mean, when in 2016, when the referendum happened, you had in many ways an all-island economy when it came to agri-food, with products crossing the border many times in their kind of transformation process, from kind of fresh milk to cheese, to Baileys, to any kind of product. And we've seen companies that are actually doing lots of cross-border changes and actually, have milk transformation both sides of the border, actually, make sure that the process on one side and in Northern Ireland, all the processing as well in the Republic. I mean, in order to prepare for, of course, these kind of whatever is going to happen, if you have to submit, forms for every border crossing, then it's in your interest to reduce the amount of border crossing you need in your supply chain between the fresh product and the final product, and that's going to be similar tensions on the fish side. The issue, of course, is not just you catch your fish, you land it, and you sell it directly. Most fish sold in Northern Ireland will be transformed in some ways, shape and form, and sometimes it's not. That transformation is not happening in Northern Ireland. And so I think we're going to have similar questions around these whole island integrated supply chains that made sense because of the small size of the island, actually don't necessarily make sense anymore once you start adding more paperwork and more cost because of Brexit. And and you end up having actually businesses spending a lot of money into shortening these supply chains to be fully in Northern Ireland or fully in Ireland, to prepare for the eventuality of Brexit, of what it could mean in practice. And it may be that in the end, these big changes were not necessary. It may be that all of these issues will be sorted in time, and that what you will have seen is huge amount of money being spent on something that would have proved useless in the end. So a huge amount of uncertainty, what it drives is waste of money for all political actors and economic actors, because you just have to hedge your bets.
I think we've got a further question coming in there on fish. Given the dependence on EU markets for NI fish, can it even survive, or will it be a casualty along with the sheep farming post-cap? I think so much depends on what arrangements are going to be in place. I think the one conclusion we can draw from what's happening is, okay, there are challenges, quite significant challenges, and for some sectors these could be existential challenges as well. And you can appreciate the frustration which exists amongst a lot of the business community about the uncertainty. It's very, very difficult to plan for an uncertain future. The hope is obviously that we'll get some clarity over the coming months. Okay. A question I might put to Dagmar. There was a point raised by Viviane there about the all-island economy. There's a question there in the chat about the extent to which the arrangements for Northern Ireland, are they going to contribute to the Irish government's objective of promoting an all-island economy, or are the arrangements that are going to be in place for Northern Ireland under the protocol actually act as an obstacle to that? I don't know, Dagmar, have you got any views on this?
Well, it's a bit difficult to know what the Irish government wants at the moment because we don't know what it will be. But looking, I think that, first of all, add a footnote to fish, it is not only dependent on the future relationship, because according to Article 5, paragraph 3, there's a role for the Joint Committee and the Specialized Committee to expand, to rule how Northern Irish fish can be dealt with under the protocol. Yeah, so I think that still doesn't save the fish industry yet, but there are two channels through which the interests can be negotiated under the protocol and in the future relationship. The protocol does not at the moment promote the all-island economy, because it only is very limited to goods, and even the single gas market needs to be negotiated specifically. So what it does allow, my internet connection is unstable. I hope everybody can hear me still. Yep. What it does allow is to expand the scope of the protocol through Article 12 provisions. So it's a dynamic thing. And if it does go on in some distant future to expand to include the free movement of services and the freedom of establishment as well, then there is a better space for promoting some of the all-island economy. At the moment, well, the question also says, will it benefit Northern Ireland? And that's down to economic specialists. There is a trade surplus from Northern Ireland with the Republic, and there's a trade surplus from GB to Northern Ireland, not the other way around. However, trade with East-West trade is much more voluminous overall than North-South trade. So will all-Ireland economy benefit Northern Ireland? That depends on whether the Irish economy and also the all-Ireland economy emancipates from the UK and uses other opportunities, and that will be a long process, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think as so many of the questions, the answer is we don't know as yet. It's contingent on a variety of factors. But I think one of the points that you made initially there is interesting, that originally there was a lot of discourse around the protocol being designed to help promote the all-island economy. That language never actually made it into the final version of the protocol. But nevertheless, there's still an ambition of some to see the all-island economy promoted. Okay. Okay, I see Viviane's put in there, we still don't know as yet. Yeah, I suppose this is one of the frustrations about the process. We're only 6 months out of the end of the transition period, and there's a lot we still don't know. I suppose the hope is that we'll get more and more answers in the coming months. We shall have to see. Okay, I think we've been through nearly all the questions there. I don't know whether Katy, Viviane, Dagmar, you'd like to have a final comment on anything that is there? Viviane, you've gone off mute.
Yes, I think I was just jumping on your comment. I think what we've had is there's been so many versions of protocol, so many versions that haven't made it in the final text, and even 2 versions of kind of legal documents, that in many ways it's very, sometimes we just forget what's in the actual final text. And it's really important to actually read it again and to check that all what we thought had been agreed, lots of it in the end didn't get agreed. And I think there's a lot of wishful thinking in what has actually been introduced in this protocol. And in many ways, and I'm worried, this is going to keep on going with future relationships. So going back to the text and stop, reality check there is still needed.
Okay. All right. I think that's brought us to a close there. I think we've addressed all the questions which have been raised in the chat. It only leaves me to thank everybody for participating, coming along this afternoon to this first of the virtual Brexit clinics. To thank Katy, Dagmar and Viviane for their contributions, their presentations. And to say, yes, well, I'm sure we'll be coming back to some of the questions which are being raised today, because I think the fact that we've got a good number of people attending today suggests there's obviously clearly still an interest in what's happening here. We'll obviously be in touch to say when we're going to hold the next clinic, but I think there's going to be a lot happening between now and October that we can reflect on at various times. And yeah, look forward to catching up with everybody again, not too distant future, possibly online, but hopefully one day once we're back on campus at Queen's. I don't know, Kevin, is there anything final word you'd like to say from the policy engagement side?
No, just thank you everybody for attending, and thank you to our panelists. And just keep following us on Twitter at QUB Policy, and also keep looking at our blog, qpol.qub.ac.uk, and any articles that are coming through from the panel and from other academics will all be posted there.
Okay, so thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.